Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. So today's guest is a new friend of mine, Rob Lohman. Rob, welcome.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. I'm excited to hang out with you for a little while and just kind of talk about addiction and recovery.
Yeah, it's so cool. So Rob and I met actually because, as you might have heard, I've been moving. We had a third baby, and we didn't have enough bedrooms, and so we'd been looking for a different house. And Rob was interested in renting my house for a really cool mission, actually. So, I mean, I want to start with your story, but why don't you just give a little color on your vision for why we met in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've been clean for 17 years from drinking and drugging, and I just have a heart for guys that are between 40 and 65 that are coming out of addiction or life transformation that's just really, really challenging. And so I feel like God kind of put on my heart to open up a men's transformational house. And that was the one day that we decided to go from buying a house to renting a place. And I literally looked on, it was Zillow.com, and your house was like right in this perfect spot. And I clicked on it, and you called me right away. And then we were just kind of dreaming together about how to help people. And that's taken a little different course of action now, but it was really cool how we did get to meet through that.
Yeah, we got to meet through it, and that's an important thing. And then, I mean, I've always had, vision. I look out my windows up here in Colorado, and I'm always like, oh, it's such a beautiful healing spot. And so hearing you talk about that vision is really cool. So we'll see where it all goes, but that's just so exciting.
Yeah, it was fun because even talking like you and Brian, and you're like, oh, you guys could put like a ropes course here. You could build one there, and just dreaming. But I know there's, again, and I hope your house sells soon, and a new journey of the right property will come along, and God's in control of that deal. So I'm just kind of going through doors I'm supposed to walk through. And yeah, then we get to meet and get to hang out, and I got to hear your story recently too. And that was a lot of fun. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I was just on Rob's podcast, which was really fun. And I think that, it's just so cool because there's a seed kind of planted with all the dreaming and all the ideas, and where it goes, we'll watch it all unfold, but it's just so exciting. So Rob, why don't you back us way up and just like start with your story? I'd love to hear, how you fell into it all, how you got out of it all, what you learned along the way.
Yeah. Falling into addiction and being ripped out of addiction. That's kind of my thing. But no, grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Most of my family lived back home in Indiana. And I was just that kid that was kind of just wired differently than most kids. Is kind of the way I always look at it. Because the minute I found alcohol, it was just like game on. The light bulbs went off. And the funny thing about it was that, so I was like your kid that knocked on your door and sold you magazines, and after a while they just said, what are you selling now, Rob? And so I was a confident little kid, but I was really insecure. We went to church and all that kind of fun stuff, youth retreats, but I actually went to a little youth event back home in so we moved from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Fort Worth, Texas when I was 9. And then at age 14, I was hanging out at this little youth event. And one of the guys said, hey, Lohman, you want to go drink some beer out in the alleyway here? And I was like, sure, let's go. So it was myself, this guy, can't remember his name at all, and 2 very pretty girls. And I was like, this is kind of fun. And I slammed like 3 beers like it was nothing. And they were nursing their little beers. And from that point, it should have been the clarity of maybe I have a problem, because I come from a long line of alcoholics. And then it was just kind of from 14 to 29, that was my drinking career. And it seemed like everything I did had a hint of alcohol with it, and a hint of, manipulating situations to benefit myself.
So in those early days, like those first 3 beers, well, first of all, you had 3 when everybody else had, probably 1 or 2. So the physical effects on you were going to be really different. But you felt like what did it feel like? Because most people don't really love how it feels the first time. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I hit the mute button.
No.
So I felt like just the insecurities kind of went away, because I was always shy around girls, and I was also the class clown. So I hid my insecurities by being that guy. I was like the popular kid, but I was really like empty inside, if that kind of makes sense. So I was covering up a lot of my own insecurities. And I don't know from where they came, because my parents were awesome parents. My dad was a little distant emotionally like a lot of guys were, because I'm 46. So, I think the dads of my generation above us, they were kind of more distant emotionally, but I think guys of my generation now are like really kind of pouring into our kids a lot more. So I'm not really sure from where those came, but I just know that when I drank, I felt more confident in who I was. And, that was 14 years old. So I'm, still in, what is that, middle school, getting ready to go to high school. And then high school comes along and then you get your license. And I mean, I'd go get drunk during lunch and then go back to school. And I kind of had like principals and teachers in my back pocket, because as an addict, you're really good at playing the field and playing everybody. And so that just kind of became what I felt like was an art. And like I was a chameleon, and I felt like that was a gift that God had given me, but it was a huge, huge detriment to me. But I just felt good, and the hangovers and all those kind of things, it just kind of was part of the game. But from the beginning, alcohol was my thing. And I always said I would never, ever do drugs. Like that was my one promise to myself, that I would never do drugs. And I held on to that until the first semester of college, and went away back to Indiana to go to college. And I remember just one of my buddies was like, "Hey, Lohman, you want to get high?" And I thought, no, I'm not touching that stuff. Like I like drinking too much. Like just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And I remember smoking pot and just felt like it felt really cool, and I felt good. And then that just led into acid and mushrooms and kind of whatever you put before me. But alcohol has always been, and gambling has always been there as well. So gambling and alcohol have been two things that have kind of been driving forces in my own lack of emotional maturity.
And so then, so you're in college, you're drinking, you're doing drugs, but are your grades still good? Are you like, where are you at?
If my parents were listening to this, I'd be like, no. So I was a really smart kid. I mean, getting good grades, if I really focused, was just really easy for me, but that wasn't my focus. I went to college actually to become a doctor, because I love my grandpa. He was a family doctor, and that's what I wanted to become. So there was this big vision of becoming a doctor, but there wasn't like a deep conviction, I don't think, because my actions did not show that. And so just being in college, I almost got kicked out the first year in college due to poor grades and some behavioral issues. And I remember my parents got the phone call, and it was a hard moment for me, because I was, again, really good at getting out of situations. And I remember the one thing that almost got me kicked out was I was, I think I had like 3/4 of a bottle of tequila on my birthday, and went upstairs to knock on the door of a girl that I liked, who said she was sick. And then there was another guy with her, and that got me really steamed. And I remember going in the stairwell, breaking out a window, and then just going into my room, a floor below. And the dean calls me in and says, "Hey, Rob, we have I don't think you can go to school here anymore, because we have someone that saw you break a window out, and you've been drunk, you've been written up this many times. Like, the school is not a good fit for you." And I remember sitting there, and I got bold, and I just said, if you're going to kick me out of school, I want to know who saw me go into a stairwell on one floor and come out that stairwell on a different floor. Only Superman could be on 2 floors at one time. And then they dropped all the charges. And that just began my journey of how do I maintain some sort of academia, because I was a fraternity guy, and alcohol was just what I did. And I quit going to church. Like God was just on the shelf most of my life. And I was just that guy that got arrested and got out of it, and was just able to talk my way out of situations. And so they always say, when you take potential and alcohol and put it in the same room, potential kicks alcohol's rear end every single time. And that was me, because I wanted to be a doctor. I just was more of a drunk than an academic scholar. And
so reverse, alcohol kicks potential.
Oh yeah. Did I say the other way? Yes.
Yeah.
Alcohol kicks potential's bottom every single time. Thank you. That wouldn't have made sense the other way. But graduation day came, and almost my entire family was there. Both sets of grandparents, like everybody was there for my graduation. And I wouldn't tell anybody this, but I didn't even know if I was going to graduate. My parents didn't even know this. I'm on the cusp of my GPA and my major being lower than it needed to be. And I'm freaking out, because it's the day before, and I still have no clue if I'm walking across the stage or not. and I have probably 23 relatives there. And my biology teacher, my anatomy teacher, calls me in and says, "Lohman, we need to talk." And I thought the bomb, the boom was getting ready to be dropped. And he pulls out my my exam, and it's 5 pages, so 5 pages of answers. And he flips the first page and he goes, 99, 98, 100. And he's telling me my grades. And he looks at me, he's like, "What have you been doing all semester?" I'd had the highest grades he's ever had on any exam. And then he said, "You're passing by the skin of your teeth."
Wow.
He's like, "But I would suggest you really start focusing, because you're a smart kid. You're just kind of dumb in my actions, and that woke me up a little bit. But so then I just graduated college, and the next chapters start to begin.
So where did you go after college?
So at the end of our senior year, a bunch of my fraternity brothers and mine and I bought a week-long trip out to Lion's Head near Vail. Like, basically Vail and Lion's Head are right next to each other for people that don't know that area. And I just told myself I'm going to find a job when I'm out here. And so here I am, 120 grand in college, expenses that my parents paid. I didn't pay for really any of it. I just kind of blew through that. And I, always felt horrible about that. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're listening. But I got a job out in Vail, and I said I found a job. And the promise to my parents was I would stay in Colorado for a year and a half, and then I would leave and go back to Texas and get a big boy job. And essentially it was a year and a half of just drinking like crazy. I mean, I went to college. I was 150 pounds. I left 210. What I didn't tell you was before my senior year of college, I totaled my car in a drunk driving accident, flipped it end over end 6 times. I mean, completely should not have walked away from that at all. And I walked away with just kind of a hurt shoulder. Again, consequence of my actions, there wasn't much consequence. I was just, I didn't think a lot before I acted. And so I'm out in Vail, Colorado, just being a bouncer at a bar, drinking 10, 15, 20 shots before a shift and just drinking the whole shift. And that's just what we did. So there was no goodness that came out of there. And after that 18 months was up, I promised my parents I'd move back to Texas, and I did. And I got a job working in the banking industry. And my career journey after that, again, this was in 1995. I moved back to Texas. So I was 24 years old at the time. Got a job in banking and then real estate. And in the middle of that, I went back and got my MBA, because I thought that if I had a higher degree, that would get me a better job. But I was still drinking 8 nights a week, drinking and driving 8 nights a week, I always say, because it was every night it was a party. And I just wasn't sick and tired of being sick and tired yet. Mm-hmm. And I was real empty inside, completely. But then I met a girl, and she drank worse than I did, but all my friends drank, and so we met in 1998 and still living in Texas, and ended up getting married. And it was one of those, it was a very short-lived marriage. Let's put it that way. Cause I graduated with my MBA. Then my uncle hired me to work for his real estate company back in Indiana. And so we moved to Indiana thinking life would change if we got away from all of our drinking friends. And the problem was, there go the both of us in our own dysfunction. And it was not a healthy marriage. It was very short-lived for a lot of reasons along the way. And we ended up getting divorced. And then about 6 months later, I ended up getting clean.
And what brought that on?
Oh, wow. So after I got divorced, I just kind of felt like it was, so I was in real estate sales. So I had a 6-state region I traveled in, so I would make up these trips I would go to up in northern Michigan, and I would just go to the casinos and go visit some of our clients, but I would just go gamble and drink and come home. And so I was not a very honest and productive employee.
But from an outward perspective, you said your uncle hired you, right? Although, what did it look like from the outside? Did it look as disastrous as you're making it sound?
Oh,
or
no.
were you really good at keeping it all together?
No, I looked good. I was fit. I had a good job. I portrayed that I was this happy-go-lucky guy, and everybody called Rob to go out. My bosses liked me. The owner of that company loved me. And so from the outside, I was like the happy-go-lucky, let's go have fun guy. And inside, I was the just, you are a piece of junk guy and you may as well be dead guy. But I would never let that. And I could see it building. You know, I would go hang out in these small little bars in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they had video poker in Indiana. So you could go to the bar down the street. And I would sit there for 5 or 6 hours and play video poker with these old guys and just form relationships. And I was more comfortable in that environment than I was in the big bar scene, but I went there all the time. But, you know, I was dating several girls at a time and just making myself look bigger than I was. I was about $65,000 in credit card debt at this time, but I looked good and I felt good and I was fit and I was running half marathons, you know, the night after a big bender. And so you couldn't tell I was that messed up inside because I wasn't letting anybody in, you know, and I was sleeping around and just like doing everything against what I really wanted to be doing. But my heart was changing quite a bit. Like I wanted to quit drinking. I was just getting tired of it. And the mental illness of drinking was getting worse because I would literally
Describe what you mean by that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of depression and everything that comes along with drinking, or people wouldn't be doing as much as they did. So for me, I was very depressed. I hated who I was. I was thinking suicide was a great option, you know, but I wasn't telling anyone. So I was just my own little therapist in my head. Right. And I would be driving down the highway, completely not drinking. I won't say sober because I'm sure I was still inebriated from the night before, but I wasn't drinking. And it'd be the middle of the day and I'd be driving down the highway up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I would literally see my car veer off and blow up and hit the median. And I would literally see myself dead. And they say most people don't see themselves die. They might see an act, but I would see myself die. And this was happening more and more. And my blackouts were longer and longer. I would leave the bar after they would close down at 1 or 2. And then I would drive to this casino, which was 2.5, 3 hours away, and gamble as much as whatever I did with my dog in the car and drive back. And I wouldn't even remember those trips half the time.
Wow.
So I don't know what happened in those blackouts, and I never will. And those are scary times that you just have these big blocks of 5 or 6 or 10 hours of, I don't know what I did. And when you're that messed up, drinking wise, you're capable of a lot of things. And so here I am, you know, 60 something $1,000 in debt, you know, feeling like a total schmuck, I guess you could say, and hated who I was. A lot of self-loathing. And it just got to a point where I was hanging out in a bar one night in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Girls everywhere, music was loud, and it was my zone. That's what I did all the time. And then all of a sudden the bar got completely dead silent. And then I audibly hear the words, "You're done." And then the bar got really loud again. And I have no clue what just happened, but I looked at my buddy Sean and I was just like, dude, I got to go home. You know, I look over at him and I said, I don't know what just happened. I might be done drinking, but I need to go home. And so I drove home, very emotional, you know, not knowing what's going on. And I walk into my little 1-bedroom apartment in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I have a workout gym in my living room, like every bachelor does, you know. And I just remember walking right past my dog, kind of on autopilot, and put up all the plates I had on my barbell in my workout gym, laid down on that bench and picked up 350 plus pounds. And right as I lifted up off the rack and I was getting ready to drop it right across my chest and kind of take myself out of the game, as I was lowering that weight, only by the power of God did this thought go into my head. And I looked at my dog, Jake, who was kind of nudging my leg and doing the puppy eyes at me. And my first thought was, who's going to feed you tomorrow morning? And then it had to be the hand of God that just pulled that weight up and put it back on the rack, because I couldn't even bench that much weight. And the fact that it stopped on the way down is a miracle, because, I mean, when you can only bench like 225 pounds, you know, it should have just kept going. And it was in that moment that I just knew that God had a different plan for me, because I felt the comfort of his arms. Like I literally felt him pick me up off that bench and just kind of say, I got more for you, buddy. And he walked me into the kitchen and we poured out all the alcohol I had. Glenlivet Scotch was my deal. Poured that out into the sink. And I mean, I can see all of this happening as I'm telling you this, like just picturing it happening as it's happening at the moment. And I slept in comfort that night for the first time in a couple decades, and woke up the next morning and I didn't know what to do now. I mean, I felt like I do now, like just alive, like just completely different guy. And I meant to call my Aunt Carol, who she has now passed away, but she died with about 35 years of sobriety. She was about 20 something years sober at the time. I remember calling her up and thinking I was calling her, but I accidentally called my mom and dad. And this was the phone call my mom was praying for years. She had no clue I was this bad off. But I said, Mom, Dad, I can't quit drinking and gambling, and I need some help. And that was the first time I authentically from my heart had like called out to reach out for help to anybody. Cried, not even reached out, cried out for help. And my mom said that I cried for probably the next hour, and she just listened to me. And then my aunt came and picked me up, and she took me to a recovery meeting, and these people were laughing and talking about how great their life was sober. And I'm thinking, last night I tried to kill myself, and these guys are laughing and having fun. I'm going to choose these guys over what happened last night. I mean, I just dove into recovery, counseling, the 12 steps. And the crazy thing was, I mean, this is, again, miracles of God. I mean, mine was divine intervention to not drink anymore, because I could drink up to 2 bottles of scotch a day, because I was in sales and marketing like you were, back in your day. You were in sales and marketing, entertaining clients, have some drinks at breakfast, have some drinks at lunch, play golf. That's just what I did. So for me, it was just sustainability throughout the day. And I went from that to literally having no detox, no withdrawal. I can honestly say I have not had one craving to drink or drug since I got clean on June 8th, 2001. And despite all the chaos and recovery, I've never, ever, ever once felt like drinking would solve a single thing.
That's amazing. And by the way, happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I did a post on Facebook while I was camping with my son at the sand dunes in northern Colorado. And it was just like, hey, I'm sober today, and I can remember this trip. And my son's here. He's only 10, so that he's never seen me drink. But just doing that, and it's crazy how many people have like shared and watched that video, and it's awesome because I'm not ashamed of my story. I mean, there's a lot of shame that can come from my story later, which we'll get into, but just the fact that I haven't had a drink or drug in that long, when I did it for 15 years, just all the time, is pretty amazing.
Wow. Gosh, that story gives me chills. It's, a lot of my work, try to keep everything really rooted in science, and like, where's the proof and the evidence, and like, really talk to the intellectual side of the brain. But, there's a big part of me that I don't often talk about, like on the podcast or in other places, that, the spiritual mystery of the world, the divinity of, like, just the fact that I can't look around and think that we weren't, amazingly and beautifully and profoundly created. And to talk about, it's funny because so much of my work is so much about the proof and the facts and the science, but then so much of my heart, like in living my own life, is just walking around in just awe and wonder of like, what is this mystery? What is this magic, and what is this? And just hearing your story is like, to see such clear intervention. It's really, really cool. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing. So so then what happened next?
Well, even though those 2 addictions were rooted out of my life, there's always other things to work on, and one thing I just never really paid attention to, I've always had a gambling addiction from, high school, on till recently, just kind of, it's always been there, and so there's that risk taking that, I mean, like, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, so there's risk taking there. And then, but there's also just the thrill of something, and So that always kind of stuck around throughout my life. And when I got clean, I wasn't married and didn't have kids, so as life continued to go on, I got out of the whole real estate world, and I ended up moving out from Indiana actually to North Carolina. And the cool thing about recovery is it's everywhere. Whether people love the 12 steps or they go to church or they just love spiritual books or whatever it is, you can find it anywhere you go. And so there was a real estate company hiring people out in that I used to work for, and they were out in North Carolina. So I flew out there just to go interview and just went to go look around. And I went to an AA meeting one night, and it was probably 250 people at this huge speaker meeting. And they always say, is anyone traveling or new? And I raised my hand. I said, my name's Rob. I'm thinking about moving here. And I literally had a stack of business cards, like an inch and a half thick, of people. It says, hey, if you need a job, if you need this. And I was like, I'm going to Charlotte, North Carolina. And I did. I went out there, and I wasn't running from anything, because I've learned now that I need to have wiser men in my life than myself, sponsors or guys that go to church or whatever. And so I'd say, hey, I want to go to California or North Carolina. Here's why. I'm like, sounds like you're not running anything. So I went out there and just started my life as a carpenter, because I needed a job. So a buddy of mine gave me a job like laying carpet, and never did that before, but it was a community, and community is so important to me in recovery. I was in community. We were playing softball together, having coffee all the time together. I had to learn how to do everything sober now. I had to learn how to play golf and throw darts and date, read a book, like all this stuff. And it was fascinating. So I'm tied in this great community. Then I became an 8th grade algebra teacher. Because in North Carolina, you can actually teach without a license for a year, as long as you're getting your license in that year. And because I had my MBA and all this stuff, they're like, yeah, great. So I started teaching 8th grade algebra. Never did that before. Started coaching the girls' softball team because they needed a coach. Never did that before. But I would ask for advice, and I was training for a marathon in Rome and with team diabetes. And so I raised like $3,500 and went to Rome to run a marathon in early recovery. And I'm a guy that used to take your money without your permission. I used to joke about that in early recovery, because like that's called thievery, and just all this stuff I would just take. And now people are sending me money to go do cool things like this. And then, the progression of my career has just been an interesting one. I then became a college career counselor a little while after that, and then left that great job to work on what became my first book I published, called The Momentum Journey. And it was, I feel like I was being called to inspire our youth to explore their life options, and now that I'm sober, I can do anything. I can go anywhere. And it was cool. So I ended up buying an RV that eventually broke down, but I made a documentary about these people's stories and why they love what they do, and wrote a book about it, and was speaking at colleges for a while. And I'm a dreamer. So I'm speaking at schools. I love to speak in front of people, not for my own good, but just to share stories and let people learn from other experiences along with my own. And then I ended up in Colorado in 2004 due to the RV breaking down. And because it all happened, I just started interviewing people in the Vail Valley. And I was on like the TV and doing cool stuff and out speaking and having a great time. And then I go to a youth event in 2006 over here in Denver with our youth group. And at the time, my story is just so weird. It's like, I can't imagine having like one job my whole life and like, just going this linear path. I'm a roller coaster thing. There's so much in all this, but I was working on a big 3-day Christian music festival that I felt like God put on my heart to do. And I'm not a musician. I've never organized a big event at all. It was a small career fair at a college once, but I feel like God was calling me to do this. So I start sharing the vision with all these people, and then all these volunteers are coming behind the vision, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then I meet my wife, who works with K-Love Radio. Well, she wasn't my wife yet. So there's a booth at this youth event, and there's a couple girls working the booth. And I was joking with a friend of mine that said, hey, maybe I'll find a pretty youth pastor or youth leader here that I could marry or whatever, and find a great girl, joking. But then I get done sharing my vision with Jen, who worked for K-Love Radio. And we just start talking about the fact we love to run marathons, and we want to write books and own a coffee shop, and we love board games. And I walked away from this little encounter thinking, I think I just met my future wife. And her friend says, Jen, I think you just met your future husband. And 6 months later, we ended up getting married. And it was just a crazy journey that we've been on since then. But yeah, I just keep walking through doors and kind of go not to the next thing, but just what can I do now to inspire people? Because I love to inspire people because I've been inspired by many others too. But then the marital journey begins because in early sobriety, like I told you, I wasn't married and did not have kids. And I'm sure with clients you work with, they can start their journey here, but then big life events happen and it brings other stuff up. I don't know if you see that with people that you talk to a lot, but
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. And not just stuff, but like undealt with stuff. So
Right.
here I am now. So I'm working on the music festival and I wasn't really making much money. It was just a big vision, and a big dream. But all these things were coming behind it and partnerships were happening. And it was exciting. It was like God's doing amazing things. We had like John Waller and Big Daddy Weave and all these really cool bands. But about 100 days before the festival was supposed to happen, we had just a couple $100 left in the checking account. And it was one of those things of just saying, we got to rally the troops or pull the plug. And in the next 100 days, we raised like $250,000 of in-kind donations and all this crazy stuff. And this big festival happened and lives were changed. And it was a cool thing called the God Rally Project. But the whole theme, if you'll see in my deal, is that I just want to help people be better and realize they are better than they think they are, and they can do bigger things in their life. And so we're going to fast forward to 2011. So I had an insurance business for about 2.5 years. I finally got like a big boy job, software sales I was working in. They closed their division down. And then in 2008, I ended up getting this nice sales job with Farmers Insurance. So I started my own insurance company. And I was that go-getter kid, that go-getter guy that just ran really, really hard. And I now have 2 kids, so I'm now married with 2 kids, but I never had ever really dealt with in early recovery my insecurities as being a dad and a husband that could provide. And that started coming out sideways. And I quit going to AA meetings because I needed to close another deal to pay rent or pay the mortgage or whatever. So I needed another deal. And so I just quit plugging into Bible studies and church and the good stuff. I quit plugging into my community. And I just became this isolated guy trying to provide and do what I thought was the right thing, and I ended up losing my agency in 2011 just due to missing some production numbers. As a person who's been in sales, it's like you miss your numbers, there's penalties, you miss them enough, and there's more penalties. And there are a million details in the middle of all this too, but I lost my agency in November of 2011. My wife quit her job of 7 years with K-Love Radio in December of 2011. And she had given them a 4-month notice because we were both spent. Like I was living on energy drinks and no sleep. Jen was living on no sleep and just stress. Our adrenals were shot. We were just kind of like that passing in the night couple of like, here's the baton. I got to go to this meeting. You watch the kids today. And just weren't sleeping. We were both complete wrecks. And I'd lost my agency. So now I'm a complete loser in my mind. I'm a horrible dad because I can't provide. I'm not loving my wife well. So I just had a lot of self-loathing going on. And then February 2012 comes along and I'm sitting in my living room, up late one night. It was after Valentine's Day. And I'm a late owl. My brain turns on when everyone goes to sleep. It's like kids are in bed. And so I was up looking for a job and working on a side business. And as I looked up in our, living room, we were in a townhouse community. In our townhouse, everything was in disarray. Because we were in the middle of remodeling a kitchen due to something that happened before. And I'm looking around and there's just stuff everywhere. And at the time I had no clue that I had like OCD issues with stuff being out of order because I was just in survival mode. And now I realize I have a big problem with stuff being cluttered. I'm better at it now, but then I just didn't. And so I got up and I started organizing the living room. And then the next thing I know, I'm staring at my covered patio and it's on fire. And I had grabbed a box of matches in between getting off the couch and organizing this, and kind of like a mental blackout. And then I'm out on my patio and I'd set some boxes on fire in our covered patio. And before I could do anything at all, I mean, it was already grown too big. I couldn't stop it at all. So I closed the sliding glass door, ran upstairs to get my wife out of bed. She rips my daughter out of her crib, and I rip my son out of his bed, and we run downstairs, and the fire is still outside. So it's not in the house yet. And I'm beating on my neighbors' doors, trying to wake them up and just screaming like, get up, like trying to save people. So nobody, like, I was just in like complete rescue mode. And then when my wife had the kids, because it was wintertime, got them all dressed, in their boots, and we went outside. Right when we shut that glass door, or the front door, the entire covered patio exploded like a bomb went off. And it was almost like God was holding his hand there and saying, would you please get out of the house now? And then right when we went out, the backdraft caught, I guess is what the fire investigator said. And the whole thing just blew up. And I'm sitting there in my own mind of addiction, right? Because I'm not drinking or drugging, right? But I still have this mindset that is like an addict. Like, how am I going to get out of this one? Like, this is not something I can get out of. And we walked around the corner of our townhouse, and the flames were 30, 40 feet high because it had melted it's kind of one of those things, you tell your story so much and it kind of takes away the emotional piece of it sometimes, but I'm looking around and there's fire trucks and cop cars everywhere. And I'm just like, what have I done? I'm looking at my kids and my wife, and like, I have screwed up. Like, I'm going to prison. Like, I am going away. And so I had to try to figure out how to cover this up so I could figure out what I was going to do to protect them, and long story short, I ended up confessing to what I did. I mean, they thought it was me from the get-go because we were stressed. It was just a lot of things, lost a business. It just, things did not look good. And my wife thought I had done it not because that's what I do, but just because I was so at the end of our rope and so desperate and so lost. And so for a couple of weeks, I lied to her, and then just had to confess to her, and she just grabbed me and hugged me and said, we'll figure this out. There's a lot of healing that still is going on with us, years later. But I confessed to what I did in June of 2012. And there's a lot of weird details in all this, but I didn't get arrested till 6 months later with 19 felonies and 13 misdemeanors. And that ended up in July of 2013. I pled down to 2 cases of arson. And the judge, we had so much support from our community. It was just amazing, just knowing that wasn't really me, but that was a guy that snapped. And now I get emotional pressure. I never got that before. And the judge sentenced me to 13 years in prison in 2013 and ended up suspending an 8-year sentence and sent me to the Department of Corrections in Colorado for 5 years. And at the time, I was the only guy I knew that had ever been to prison. That's not my normal circle of influence. So we had to learn how to navigate the whole legal system, which we knew nothing about. And it was in that time away that it was 10 and a half months that I was locked up. But it was in that time that I was away that I was able to really secure who I was and get back to the roots of who is Rob Lohman? Who is God? Why have I been a Christian my entire life? I'm just this surface, bogus, hypocritical Christian guy. But I had all the time in the world now, and thank goodness I got sent to a minimum security prison. There were no fences, nothing, just a big dirt path around it. If someone escaped, they could see the footprints. But decided when I confessed to my crime a couple months after I committed it, that it was God's show at that time. And he has done so many miracles along the way that the legal system said could not be done. He's done. And I can only attribute it to him, because my attorney and DAs, they're like, jaws are on the ground. Like, how did that even happen? And not egotistically, but I'm like, I serve God. I don't serve the legal system. You know, he'll do whatever he's going to do. And I have to be okay with that. But while I'm on my little sabbatical from life, right, in Delta, Colorado, my wife's back here, having to be mom and dad, disciplinarian, nurturer, you know, trying to figure out homework and sports. And so she's on this own little island to figure out who's the idiot that she married and who is he really, and what do I do with him? And it was through that process that she just had people pulling her from left to right. You should divorce him. You know, you're a Christian, you have to stay with him, and all these things. And she just said, you know, God, what do you want me to do? And he just said, you know, the guy that set that fire is not my child. That's one that got way off the beaten path. And so she chose to stay with me, you know, and again, we have a lot to continue to work through still. But I only saw my kids 6 days of those 10 and a half months, and my wife, you know, and I mean, but the community back here in the Denver area just surrounded my family, and they surrounded me in prison. They send me books and letters and cards. And so for me, it was a huge time of reflection. And I knew, and that now I know who I am. I know what my triggers are. You know, I know when things are going well in my life and they're not going, like, I'm real in tune and self-aware of Rob now. Before, I was just this ship in a raging sea that had no clue where he was going. But when I was locked up, I read this book by Mark Batterson called The Circle Maker. And in that book, he talks about quit praying for things from the Lord that he's already promised you, and praise him for them. And so I started doing that. He promised me that I would get into the halfway house the first round, which normally no one gets into halfway houses with arson charges because of insurance, you know. But I knew in my gut, he promised me two things: that I would get the halfway house the first round, and that he healed my marriage already, you know. And I hold on to that, because there's a lot of times Jen and I I'm not doing well or whatever, and we argue like most married couples, you know, but I believe he's healed my marriage. And I know he'll heal the relationship with my kids when they're old enough to really understand what happened to dad. But I got into the halfway house at 10 and a half months of a 5-year sentence. And it was a complete miracle. Even the director of the halfway house said, we don't let arsonists in this place, but because you have a stack of letters from pastors in your community, you have a lot to lose. So we're going to take a risk. And I was like their model child, you know. It was like, I don't do anything I'm not supposed to do. And so I lived there for 11 months, rode my bike everywhere because I couldn't drive, took the bus. I lost all my liberties to see my family until a period of time, you know, and so you had to earn all these freedoms back. And the reason I do what I do now in working with addicts and felons is because, honestly, I couldn't get a good sales job because of my felonies. And I don't know if people realize that, but if you have a felony on your record, it's really hard. It's an obstacle, but it's not, I can't get one. It just makes it harder to get a good sales job to what I was doing before. And so after too many rejections, I heard about becoming an interventionist and a recovery coach and getting trained and certified. And I ran through those doors and then just officially launched my business December 2015 after I got trained. And I've just been out in society and the world, just getting my name out there. And now I do a lot of interventions, a lot of recovery coaching. I have this, you know, Beyond the Bars radio podcast, and I want to open this house. And so I just continue to pray that as doors continue to open, I don't stand in the hallway too long for the next one. And I sit there and pray that, you know, people will come behind the house I want to open up and get behind it and help that get on the traction, because that's what I really want to do. That's what I really feel called to do, is love on men that are struggling and in that hole that I was in for way too long.
Wow. Wow. Gosh, that's a hell of a story. um, you probably get asked this and you might have covered it, but in that moment when you set the box is on fire, do you have any recollection of intention?
No, I wish I could honestly say I did it for this exact reason.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I have talked before, it's like understanding. I wish I would have understood so much of this back then, of the subconscious and how it drives us so hard and fast sometimes, that I don't know what was back there, but I know it wasn't to hurt people,
Yeah.
because I don't do that. I love my wife and my kids, and it was literally just me just kind of saying, I don't know, was it a suicide attempt? Was it what? I don't know. I don't have a clear cut answer says this is what it was, but I do know a million factors that were not in place in my life at that time, that if they were, none of this ever would have happened. And so I pay attention to that now in my own life, where, I also wait tables like part-time just to bridge the financial gap, and I'm a hard worker, and I work hard, but I know, my pride is completely leveled. I just want to walk humbly, and I know I can be stubborn at times, but that's why I have, friends like Jeff and John and Todd and these guys, they'll say, Lohman, let's do a reality check here real quick. And so with the Rock Transformational House that I want to open, I'm so patient with that and just letting God kind of run the show, that normally, like back when I did my first book and documentary, I think I was more driving that train than he was. But now I just got to pull the reins off and say, look, you know what's better for me than I do. I really feel like that's where he's calling me to go. And I hope along the way, I run into some people that say, hey, I don't want to physically do that, but I have a heart for people in recovery and addicts, or even just someone on a nervous breakdown path. And I want to donate a ton of money to you to help you out to get this off the ground, or we have a house we let you use for a couple of years just to donate the house, or whatever it looks like. I don't know, but it's going to be a lot cooler than what I think it is. And I just know there's people out there that want to help, that don't know how to, that have the resources to help people, and if people are listening, they want to have that conversation, I'd love to do it. But, people have the intervention that I'm working on now is for a 15-year-old kid to a 72-year-old man, all the way in between there. So there's a lot of people that need help, and a lot of more advocates that need to be out there. And there's another interesting part to my story on restitution and stuff that I can get into if we have time. But yeah, so I'm just kind of being an advocate out there, trying to help people, and, leaving my legacy for my kids along the way.
That's so beautiful. It's so cool. Well, first of all, where can people, podcast Beyond the Bars, which is just a genius name, by the way, considering all the dynamics.
Yeah, for sure.
And then where else can people find you?
So I have a centralized website called theaddictionrecoveryhub.com. So theaddictionrecoveryhub.com. And it has all the information on there, from interventions and coaching to the podcast to the house. And that's kind of the best place for people to learn more about myself. I've got some cool new videos I'm putting together that a friend of mine green screened me with, that I now get to work on getting out there to everybody. But yeah, I'm just here to be of service, and along the way, make a living at it. So
that's awesome. It's so cool. And then I always ask this question, what if you could go back in time? First of all, the fact that you had 6 months before you were arrested, and you knew you were going to be arrested, and I'm assuming that your stress in your life had to have gotten worse, because now you don't have a house, right? And all your stuff has been burned up, and everybody's looking at you funny. So through this fact, like so many times, like, oh, well, people are trying so hard, and then something stressful comes up. And yeah, some of the things are really stressful. Some of them are like death or divorce. And then some of the things are like my mother-in-law, and they're stressful, certainly, but they're not necessarily. And the fact that you in this moment did not go back to drinking or using drugs is like really cool. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because that's just huge. And it just shows that, like, if you really decide it's not an option, like, without never an option. Doesn't matter what circumstance, it's not an option. You know, I don't think the strength that Rob had is like necessary. Like it's not unique. Like anybody can have that strength, you know, once you make that just firm 100% decision, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because through that, you're saying the 6 months before I got arrested, from the day I really confessed and I committed, like there was some stress, but honestly, I was just trusting God with all the details. I mean, there was a lot of weird peace that was happening too, because Jen and I didn't know what to do, but it was like, we were just trusting that God did. And so there was this weird peace that was happening when we didn't know when I was going to get arrested. But because my wife was listed as a victim, she got a letter that said there's a case that's been officially filed, which is what my attorney told me, that you'll get a letter probably before they arrest you because they have to make a case. And so we were just kind of living life in a weird, kind of like that weird, eerie sound of just kind of like crickets or whatever. But there was a tremendous amount of peace I had from the day I literally turned it all over to even still today. And just the only way I got through that was like his strength completely. Because there's no way I could have done it. I don't know how people go through life in these stressful times without having a very strong faith, because my faith can never be taken from me. You know, and that's how I got through all this. And that's how my wife's gotten through it. And it's been a really weird journey of look at all these darts being thrown at you, but trusting that God's absorbing the darts. You know, even with my restitution, I mean, I have a huge restitution that I owe. And the state of Colorado has a 12% interest rate on all restitution. So when you look at it, I mean, I'm upside down every single month on the amount I pay towards my restitution to how much interest is being added onto it. So I'm working with some senators and House reps now. And if anyone knows any other ones, it'd be great to help change that, because it literally is a financial prison that I could be under until I die. Still trying to figure that piece out right now with
that's crazy.
Some advocacy work, but I'm not going to let that prison mess with me, because I know God's got that handled too. So I just pay my monthly amount, and I would love to pay it all off to right my errors, but unfortunately I'm not making $250,000 yet a year, you know, so I do what I can do, but the details are out of my control.
I think it's really interesting because so many people think that, you know, faith or church or whatever is kind of like putting your head in the sand, right? It's kind of like saying, okay, well, I'm just going to say that there's this heaven and we're all going there someday, and there's, everything's all good. And I think that's really the opposite of what Jesus said. You know, I think Jesus said that, hey, guess what? Suffering is the way, you know, walk with me. And I'm not telling you you're not going to suffer. In fact, I'm telling you that it's pretty much guaranteed. And if you follow me, that means following me through the worst suffering, you know, through the most amount of sacrifice. And that's what I'm going to ask of you every single step along the way. And guess what? I'm never, ever going to tell you it's going to be easy. And I'm never, ever going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you that I'll be with you the whole way, and that I'm bigger than you and stronger than you. And there's something that I can give you that no living human and no substance and nothing in a bottle and nothing else can ever give. And I think it's such a thing that we get so confused about, because people think, well, why do you need a faith, you know, just to put on the blinders and pretend everything's okay? And no, it's actually the opposite of that. It's to realize that in our world, nothing's really okay. There's a lot of fucked up shit. It's the truth.
Yeah.
But that, you know, we're not alone in it all.
Yeah, there's a huge piece in that. And, you know, if I'm wrong in the end, then at least I had that with me while I was here. You know what I mean? Like, but I believe it so much. And fortunately, I had the time to really pour in to believe it. You know, now when you're busy out here with kids and job and running around and stuff, you know, I read 42 books in 10 and a half months when I was locked up. I studied a lot. I don't have as much of that time now, but have the basic beliefs and the foundations to trust that process. So when crazy things come my way. And I talk to a lot of people that are going through some ugly, disgusting stuff where it's a good reason to just say, God, forget you. Like, forget you. But when I see people that are in that and they realize that that's not the direction they want to go, it's so amazing to watch them go through that. But there's a lot of peace in that too. And I'm just going to keep holding on to that. And my kids love the Lord and they're awesome kids. And I'm just going to, that's my driving force. So wherever all this goes and things go, it could look totally different in the end, and that's fine. I'm not in control of that, but I can't sit on my couch and just wait for stuff to happen. I have to get out there and I have to move and I have to talk to people and I got to get in all the pieces are going, and I can't just sit around and be like, all right, God, let's have it all happen. I'm like, no, I'm going to, shake some trees and make some noise and have some fun.
Yeah.
And
you
love
need
my
to
kids.
move to be, It's like we talked about when I was on your podcast, the idea of, I've always really tried to live my life of getting into the boat and getting the boat out on the water and then trusting the wind rather than waiting for the right time to get in the boat.
Amen to that. That's too. So we're in the boat. We may be on the same pond, maybe not, but we'll, as they say, our paths meet, and then we might be on a different river, but it's like they meet again. And you're pretty awesome for what you're doing. So I've had a lot of fun hanging out with you. So thanks for having me on today for sure.
Yeah, no, it's been so great, Rob. Thank you so much. It's really an honor. All right. Have a good day.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
This has been Annie Grace with This Naked Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more at thisnakedmind.com. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps us spread the word.